It would certainly be fun if Alabama lost and Florida blew this whole thing up, and
Yes, it would.
you had some, Notre
For
Dame people.
everyone but the committee, actually, it would be very fun.
It would be very fun for all of us. We have a couple minutes. You are much more in depth in the college football game than I am, and something that I was curious about was this year you had two teams. Well, Iowa State maybe counts, but two teams really who are not the traditional blue bloods of college football, in Coastal Carolina and BYU, who made a run at the top 10, were in the top 10. Now they've both kind of fallen out. But somehow this college football playoff format, and we've seen it every year but the year Washington was in, not rewards, but weeds out everybody but the big blue bloods, right? It's been Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State, you know, Florida, like all the regular teams every year. I was curious, like your thoughts, because I was thinking maybe like BYU and Indiana would be a lot of fun in the college football playoff, but with four teams, we're never going to get that.
It's an interesting thought, and I'll throw Cincinnati in there too,
Yeah,
who is
Cincinnati,
number
absolutely,
9 right now.
absolutely.
It was a team that got the game canceled due to COVID, and now it's like they moved down even though they didn't play, and a two-loss Georgia team that, respect to them, they're playing better as of late, but with a quarterback switch in JT Daniels, so maybe that has an effect on it. You feel like they're a different team, but they lose to Florida pretty handily and they lose to Alabama pretty handily. It all comes back to, do you feel like the playoff should be expanded? I've always advocated for that. I think the right number is 6 if they can figure out a way to deal with that.
Well, the
And
NFL did six forever. It's not hard, right? Two
yeah,
teams go by, and
yeah, if you can deal with the buyer, you feel comfortable with that. I think that's the right. I think 8 might be a little bit extensive, but there is an argument. And Ryan Gregoire, when we were talking earlier today, and again, you'll hear this later. He said, "What's the point of playing for some of these teams that are the group of 5 teams? If you're Cincinnati and you do everything that's on your schedule, well, what the heck is the point of playing? Because you know that you have no shot of ever making the college football playoff." Where I would disagree with that line of thinking is that not in this year, but in the traditional sense, in the traditional format, Cincinnati would have the opportunity to say, okay, let's go play one of the big boys. So if Cincinnati at number 9 and 8-0 were to go schedule a game with Texas A&M and beat Texas A&M, well, guess what? They're now a serious contender and certainly in the conversation for, okay, this is a team we need to take seriously. It's just the nature of COVID and the way that you have to play in your conference. And at the end of the day, and what the committee has shown outside of the top 4, because those top 4 have seemed to have always been inevitably those in some order: Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, maybe Notre Dame hasn't always been there. Oklahoma's been there at times, but they've been traditional blue blood programs. Is that, you know, no matter what your record says, they are going to evaluate things based upon who we feel like, as it relates to these group of 5 teams that are lower and not in the top 4, who we feel like would win, who is the better team. We're getting the best 4 teams into the playoff, and who head to head, if you scheduled the game on a neutral site, would win between Georgia and Cincinnati. And what the message is that they don't respect sort of the conference in the recruiting that Cincinnati is a part of in the American Athletic Conference, compared to a team that's playing in the SEC, even with 2 losses. It's just more of an eye test thing for me than anything else, and that seems to be sort of the way that the committee seems to like to determine these types of things. But I think it's a valid point and a valid argument. The one thing I also said in response was, when you look at the old BCS format, to the idea that, hey, the games don't matter in Cincinnati, what's the point of playing? They were never going to make it into a top 2, right? The BCS was never going to say, all right, Cincinnati is going to be a team that's in the top 2, and they still played anyway, because there was a time where winning the Orange Bowl or winning the Sugar Bowl or the Cotton Bowl was a big deal, the Peach Bowl, whatever it is. And that has sort of been devalued because of the emphasis on who's the best team and who's getting into the top 4. And it sort of shifted some of the focus and attention away from those traditionally big time bowl games, the Rose Bowl in there as well. The New Year's Six is where your focus is, but that to me is the biggest deal. Is at some point the committee just doesn't feel like these are teams that are of the caliber, no matter what the record says.
Yeah, and this year, 6 wouldn't solve that. because all three of those teams, Coastal, BYU, and Cincinnati, are all out of the top 6.
Yeah.
So expanding may not solve it. It may be something where you kind of look at it an NCAA basketball format, where if you win your conference, you get some. Who knows? It's a lot.
Well, that's an argument to be made for if you want to expand it to 8, and then you say, all right, the conference championships from the 5, or maybe pick 6, or maybe it's 8, whatever conference you want to use it as, and then maybe there are 2 wild cards. So you go with the top 5, and maybe whatever group of 5 conference that you want to include in that, whether it be the American. I feel like that's probably the next best conference when you're talking about the Power 5 in that sense. So yeah, it's certainly something that's on the table. I tend to also believe that things might turn out a little bit differently if we are really going with an 8-team playoff. When push comes to shove, if they're putting the best 8 teams in, I just don't know how Cincinnati's not there if it's really an 8-team playoff. So I would kind of call them on that in that sense. But it's certainly a legitimate discussion, and something that a lot of people have said, all right, this doesn't make sense. Where does Cincinnati fit in this whole situation, and how are they getting punished for being a team that doesn't play in a stellar conference? Certainly food for thought, and an interesting thing to try and break down and get to, because the college football playoff committee has some explaining to do and some things to figure out going forward.
Absolutely. If you want to hear more of that, as Nick mentioned, check out College Football Gridiron every week. This week it's Nick and Ryan. You can check that out wherever you get your podcasts.